Welcome back to Mindless Lessons. Tonight we are going somewhere that has haunted the world for 12 years. On the morning of March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people said goodnight to air traffic control. 1 minute later, it vanished from every radar screen on Earth. The transponder went dark. The plane turned in the wrong direction, and for 7 hours, it flew through the night over a remote ocean and was never seen again. 12 years later, a ship is searching for it right now as you listen to this. The plane has not been found. The cause remains officially undetermined. Get comfortable. This is the story of MH370. Find a comfortable position now and let your body settle wherever you are resting. Feel the weight of yourself against the mattress, against the pillow. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw unclench, and take one slow breath in through your nose. And let it out gently through your mouth. Tonight I want to tell you about the last words spoken from the cockpit of a Boeing 777 before it disappeared from the face of the earth. Those words were spoken by a captain who had flown for 18,000 hours, a man who knew his aircraft completely, who had spent his entire career in the sky. Those last words were ordinary, routine, the kind of thing a pilot says hundreds of times across a career without thinking twice. He said, "Goodnight, Malaysian 370." And then the plane disappeared. Not slowly, not with a distress call or an emergency signal, not with wreckage or a debris field or any of the things that happen when a large aircraft goes down. It simply vanished. 239 people aboard a Boeing 777, one of the most sophisticated aircraft ever built, packed with redundant systems and transponders and emergency locators, disappeared from radar screens in the early hours of March 8, 2014, and have never been found. Not the plane. Not the black box flight recorder. Not the cockpit voice recorder that captured every sound in that cockpit in its final moments. 12 years later, the largest and most expensive aviation search in history has covered hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of ocean and found almost nothing. A new search began on December 30th, 2025, and is still ongoing as you listen to this tonight. The plane has not been found. The cause of its disappearance remains officially undetermined. Tonight we are going to follow MH370 from the moment it left the ground to the moment it left our ability to explain it. Every fact I tell you is real. Every detail comes from official investigation reports or verified sources. And at the end of it, as you have drifted toward sleep, the most honest thing I can tell you will still be the same thing the official Malaysian investigation concluded after 1,500 pages of analysis. We do not know what happened. Close your eyes. Let your breathing slow, and let us begin. March 8, 2014, 12:41 in the morning. Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia. A Boeing 777-200ER belonging to Malaysia Airlines pushes back from the gate and begins its taxi toward the runway. The flight number is MH370. The destination is Beijing, China. The journey should take approximately 5.5 hours. Aboard are 239 people, 227 passengers, and 12 crew. Among the passengers are 154 people from China, a celebrated group of 24 Chinese calligraphy artists returning from an exhibition in Kuala Lumpur, along with business people, tourists, and families. 50 Malaysians, citizens of France, Australia, Indonesia, India, the United States, Ukraine, Canada, and Iran. 239 ordinary people on an ordinary overnight flight. The captain is Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old. He's been flying for Malaysia Airlines for 33 years. He has logged more than 18,000 hours in the air. He is, by every measure, an exceptionally experienced pilot. The first officer is Farik Abdul Hamid, 27 years old, recently engaged to be married. This is one of his first flights as a fully qualified first officer on the Boeing 777, having recently completed his type rating. The Boeing 777 itself is the aircraft of its generation. Twin engines. One of the safest commercial aircraft ever produced. It has redundant systems for everything: navigation, communication, engine monitoring, emergency transmission. It is an aircraft designed so that multiple things have to go wrong simultaneously for any single system to fail. At 12:41 in the morning, MH370 lifts off from the runway and climbs into the dark sky above Kuala Lumpur. Everything is normal. The weather is clear. The aircraft is performing perfectly. The crew has filed a standard flight plan. The 239 people aboard are settling in for a night flight, adjusting pillows, ordering drinks, closing their eyes against the darkness outside the windows. At 9:19 in the morning, 38 minutes after takeoff, Captain Zahari speaks his last recorded words to air traffic control. Goodnight, Malaysian 370. It is the standard sign-off as MH370 leaves Malaysian airspace and enters Vietnamese airspace. A routine call, a phrase he has said countless times. 1 minute later, MH370 vanishes from civilian radar. The plane never checked in with Vietnamese air traffic control. It never called anyone again. Let your body relax now. Let your arms feel heavy, your legs heavy. At 1:21 in the morning, 2 minutes after Captain Zahari's final radio call, something happened aboard MH370 that has never been explained. The aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. A transponder is the device that broadcasts a plane's identity, altitude, and position to air traffic control radar. It is not a passive system. It actively sends out a signal every few seconds, telling the world where the aircraft is and how high it is flying. On radar screens across Malaysia and Vietnam, the symbol for MH370 simply disappeared. The official investigation later confirmed that the transponder signal from MH370 ceased, while signals from all other aircraft on the radar display continued normally. There was no technical malfunction in the radar system. There was no weather event that could have caused an equipment failure. Someone turned the transponder off. Or something caused it to fail at exactly this moment, a moment that the investigation could not explain technically. At almost the same time, the ACARS system also stopped transmitting. ACARS is the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, a separate communication channel that sends automated maintenance and position data from the aircraft to the airline on the ground. It operates independently of the transponder. For both systems to fail simultaneously through accidental technical failure is considered extremely unlikely. Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak stated in 2014 that both the radar transponders and the flight data transmission system had been deliberately turned off by someone on the flight in an attempt to hide the plane's location. Deliberately turned off by someone on the flight. But the investigation found no evidence that could conclusively identify who turned them off or why. Because the cockpit voice recorder, the device that captures every sound and every word spoken in the cockpit, has never been found. Whatever was said between Captain Zahari and First Officer Farik in those minutes after 1:19 in the morning is knowledge that exists in a device sitting somewhere at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. And we cannot reach it. Your breathing is slower now. The dark outside your window is the same dark that was outside those windows. There's something deeply strange about the way the ocean gave back pieces of MH370. Not all at once, not in one place, but slowly, one piece at a time across years, washing up on beaches thousands of kilometers apart as if the ocean was deciding on its own schedule what to return and what to keep. The first piece arrived 16 months after the plane disappeared. July 29, 2015. A beach cleaner on the French island of Réunion in the western Indian Ocean was walking the waterline when he noticed something unusual among the seaweed and driftwood. A large piece of white and gray composite material, barnacle encrusted from months at sea, approximately 2 meters long. It was a flaperon, a movable section of the trailing edge of the right wing of a Boeing 777. Boeing engineers examined it. Malaysia Airlines maintenance records were checked. The serial numbers were carefully traced through the manufacturing database. It was confirmed as belonging to MH370. After 16 months of searching an area of ocean larger than several countries combined and finding absolutely nothing, the plane had sent one piece of itself to a tourist beach in Réunion, not where the search was happening, not in the area investigators had targeted with their submarines and their sonar, but 4,000 kilometers away, carried by Indian Ocean currents to a beach where an ordinary person doing an ordinary job happened to look twice at something unusual. Over the following years, more pieces followed. A section of horizontal stabilizer found in Mozambique. A piece of interior cabin trim found on a beach in Tanzania. Fragments of composite material washed ashore in Mauritius, South Africa, and on the island of Rodrigues. Small pieces of what appeared to be MH370's interior panels discovered in Madagascar. In total, 27 pieces of debris have been identified as definitely or possibly belonging to MH370. Each piece told investigators something. The drift patterns of each item, mapped backward through Indian Ocean current models, were consistent with a crash site in the southern Indian Ocean along the arc of the final Inmarsat satellite handshake. The condition of some pieces suggested the aircraft hit the water relatively intact rather than breaking apart in the air. The barnacle growth on the flaperon provided clues about the water temperature where it had floated, which narrowed the geographic possibilities slightly. But no single piece of debris, not any of the 27 confirmed or likely items, contained information that told investigators precisely where MH370 entered the water. Think about what that means. The ocean returned 27 fragments of a Boeing 777 over the course of several years. Each fragment traveled thousands of kilometers on Indian Ocean currents before reaching a shore where someone found it. Each fragment was identified, examined, and added to the investigation's understanding of what happened. And yet, with all 27 pieces, the investigators still could not identify the location of the crash with enough precision to search it effectively. The ocean had returned the fragments. It had kept the context. It had given investigators enough information to know that they were looking in approximately the right part of the world, but not enough to find the aircraft itself. The flaperon that started it all, the first piece found on that Réunion beach in July 2015, is now in a laboratory in France, carefully preserved, examined many times by many experts, photographed and documented and analyzed. It is the most significant physical object from MH370 that exists in human hands. A 2-meter section of aircraft wing, covered in barnacles, found by someone doing a job most people would consider unremarkable, containing no information about what happened to the 239 people who were aboard when it was last part of a whole aircraft flying through the night sky. 6 weeks before MH370 disappeared, Captain Zaharieh Ahmad Shah sat down at the flight simulator he had built in his home in Shah Alam, Malaysia. He had built it himself over many years. Multiple monitors, realistic controls, software that replicated the precise systems and instruments of a Boeing 777. It was a serious piece of equipment, the kind that dedicated pilots build to stay sharp between flights, to practice unusual scenarios, to explore conditions they would never deliberately create in a real aircraft carrying real passengers. In January 2014, roughly 6 weeks before MH370 disappeared on the night of March 8th, Captain Zaharieh used his simulator to model a flight. When Malaysian investigators examined the simulator's data files after the disappearance, they found that some files had been recently deleted. Digital forensic specialists worked to recover those deleted files. What they reconstructed from the recovered data showed a simulated flight that departed from a point near Kuala Lumpur, flew northwest up and across the Indian subcontinent, turned south somewhere over the Indian Ocean, and then continued south on a long, straight track until the simulated aircraft's fuel ran out somewhere over the remote southern Indian Ocean. The similarity to the path MH370 is believed to have actually taken has been discussed and debated every year since it was revealed. The match is not precise. The simulated route and the actual reconstructed route of MH370 diverge in several significant ways. Experienced pilots routinely practice extreme and unusual scenarios on home simulators, fuel exhaustion flights, emergency diversions, off-route navigation. None of this is inherently suspicious for a senior Boeing 777 captain with 33 years of flying experience. But the Malaysian investigation reviewed Captain Zaharieh's background exhaustively. His financial records showed no unusual activity. His medical history showed no diagnosed psychological conditions. His communications with family and friends in the weeks before the flight showed no indication of distress, conflict, or any kind of plan. People who knew him well described him as passionate about aviation, active in the community, and looking forward to upcoming personal plans. The official investigation found no evidence of a motive. No note, no message, no farewell communication, no indication to anyone who knew him that March 7, 2014 was anything other than another working day. And yet the simulator data exists. Investigators cannot explain it to universal satisfaction. They cannot say with certainty that it was innocent practice or that it was deliberate preparation. They can only note that it exists, that it bears some resemblance to the actual flight path, that it was on deleted files that someone had attempted to remove, and that the man who could explain it is somewhere at the bottom of the Indian Ocean and cannot be asked. This is one of the things that makes MH370 so frustrating to investigate. The evidence that exists is suggestive without being conclusive. It points in directions without confirming them. It raises questions without answering them. A deleted file that may or may not be significant. A simulated route that may or may not have been practice for what happened 6 weeks later. A man whose character was described in completely contradictory terms by different people who knew him, some saying he was a warm and dedicated family man and aviation enthusiast, others suggesting he had been going through personal difficulties in the months before the flight. Every piece of evidence about MH370 is like this. It tells you something without telling you enough. It opens a door without letting you see what is on the other side. The man who could close those doors and answer those questions flew a Boeing 777 into the southern Indian Ocean on the night of March 8, 2014. And the Indian Ocean is keeping him the same way it keeps everything else about this story. In the deep, in the cold, in the silence that no investigation has yet managed to break. At 8:19 in the morning on March 8, 2014, 7 hours and 38 minutes after MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur, a satellite positioned above the Indian Ocean received one final transmission from the aircraft. Not a message, not a distress call, not any kind of intentional communication from whoever was in control of the plane at that moment. Just an automated handshake. The satellite communication system aboard MH370 pinging the Inmarsat satellite one final time, saying in the language of electronics, "I'm still here." And then nothing. The satellite waited for the next scheduled handshake to arrive. It did not come. The silence that followed that 8:19 transmission has lasted 12 years and is still ongoing right now as you listen to this. Investigators detected something else in that final transmission. A partial signal, sometimes called a log-on request, that suggested the aircraft's communication system may have briefly lost power and then attempted to restart itself. The kind of restart sequence that occurs when an aircraft's engines flame out due to fuel exhaustion, temporarily interrupting the power supply before the backup systems engage. Which means at 8:19 in the morning, MH370 may have been in its final descent. Engines silent, fuel exhausted. A 270-ton aircraft beginning its fall through the darkness toward the surface of the Indian Ocean somewhere below. Was anyone still alive at 8:19? That question may be the most haunting detail of the entire MH370 mystery. We know with reasonable confidence that the aircraft was still flying at 8:19. We know that the engines were likely still running moments before that transmission. We know that at some point shortly after 8:19, the aircraft entered the ocean. What we do not know is the condition of the people aboard in those final hours and minutes. If the aircraft had been flying on autopilot since shortly after the transponder went off, if whatever happened in the cockpit had rendered the crew incapacitated early in the flight, then most of the 239 people aboard may have been unaware of anything unusual. They may have been asleep for the entire 7 hours. They may never have known the plane was flying over the Indian Ocean in the wrong direction in the middle of the night. Or the aircraft may have been under active control throughout the flight. Someone may have been in the cockpit making decisions for 7 hours, choices about altitude, about heading, about whether to descend or continue or change course. And whatever those decisions were, and whoever made them, took the aircraft to its final position and let it run out of fuel over the most remote ocean on Earth. The difference between those two scenarios, unconscious aircraft versus actively controlled aircraft, changes everything about how we understand MH370. And the cockpit voice recorder, sitting somewhere on the ocean floor, contains the audio that would tell us which one it was. Everything that happened between 2:22 in the morning when MH370 disappeared from military radar and 8:19 when it sent its final satellite ping is completely unknown. Nearly 6 hours of flight over the darkest and most remote ocean on Earth, in complete silence as far as the rest of the world was concerned. Whatever happened during those 6 hours, whatever was said or done or decided or experienced by the people aboard that aircraft, is knowledge that exists nowhere that we can currently access. It is not lost. It happened. It was recorded by the instruments aboard the aircraft. It left physical evidence in the form of the aircraft's final position on the ocean floor. We simply cannot reach it yet. And at 8:19 on the morning of March 8, 2014, the satellite above the Indian Ocean received the last electronic signal from MH370, and the ocean below received everything else. Here is what makes MH370 different from every other aviation mystery in history. The plane did not crash immediately after the transponder went off. It kept flying for hours. Malaysian military radar, which operates on a different principle to civilian air traffic control radar and does not rely on the transponder signal, continued tracking an unidentified aircraft for 45 minutes after MH370 disappeared from civilian screens. And what that military radar showed is one of the most extraordinary details of this entire story. The aircraft turned, not continued north toward Beijing as planned, not descended toward an emergency landing, not sent any signal of distress. It turned west, back across the Malaysian peninsula, then northwest up the Strait of Malacca toward the Andaman Sea, flying at normal cruising altitude, at normal speed, as if under the control of a pilot who knew exactly what they were doing. At 2:22 in the morning, MH370 disappeared from Malaysian military radar as it flew beyond the range of detection. The last military radar position showed the plane over the Andaman Sea, hundreds of kilometers from its intended route, flying in completely the wrong direction and apparently under deliberate control. An aircraft does not turn itself. A Boeing 777 does not reprogram its own flight computer and fly itself hundreds of kilometers off course in the wrong direction. Someone flew that plane west. Someone made a deliberate navigational decision after the transponder went off. Who made that decision and why is something the investigation could not determine. Because the flight data recorder that would show every input made to the aircraft's computers has never been found. The plane that turned west is out there somewhere, still carrying everything it carried when it left Kuala Lumpur. Still carrying the question of who turned it and why. Still unanswered. After MH370 disappeared from military radar at 2:22 in the morning, the world lost all track of it. Or so everyone initially believed. But there was one system still functioning aboard MH370 that nobody initially realized was still sending signals. A satellite communication system made by a British company called Inmarsat. This system was not designed to track aircraft. It was designed to allow the airline to send maintenance data and operational messages to the plane during flight. It communicated via satellite rather than ground-based radar. And even after the transponder and ACARS were turned off, even after the plane vanished from every radar screen, this Inmarsat system kept sending automated signals to a satellite in orbit above the Indian Ocean. Not messages, not position data, just electronic handshakes, automatic pings that said to the satellite, in effect, I am still here. 7 of these handshakes were recorded, one approximately every hour. The last handshake was recorded at 8:19 in the morning. 7 hours after the transponder went off. 7 hours. For 7 hours after MH370 disappeared from the world's radar screens, it was still flying. Still communicating with a satellite above the Indian Ocean. Still carrying 239 people somewhere over an ocean at night. Investigators worked for months to analyze the Inmarsat data. The geometry of the handshake signals, how long they took to reach the satellite and return, could tell them something about where the aircraft was when each handshake was sent. Not a precise position, but an arc. A curved line on a map representing all the possible positions the aircraft could have been at each moment. The final arc, the arc of the 7th and last handshake, runs through the southern Indian Ocean off the coast of Western Australia. Investigators concluded that MH370 most likely flew south after disappearing from military radar. Flew for 7 hours over the darkest and most remote stretch of ocean on Earth, and came down somewhere along that final arc when it ran out of fuel. Somewhere. Not exactly. Somewhere in an area of ocean the size of several countries. And that somewhere has never been narrowed down enough to find anything. The satellite handshakes told us the plane was still flying. They could not tell us where it went. What happened next was the largest and most expensive aviation search in the history of human flight. More than 26 countries contributed ships, aircraft, and resources. The Australian government led the underwater search in the southern Indian Ocean. Sophisticated autonomous underwater vehicles, robots that could dive to depths of 6,000 meters, systematically scanned the ocean floor along the arc of the final satellite handshake. They covered 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, an area larger than the entire country of England. They found nothing. Not the aircraft, not the black boxes, not the engines, not the seats or the luggage or any of the thousands of items that should have remained on the ocean floor where the plane came down. In July 2015, a piece of the plane was found. A flaperon, a section of the right wing, washed up on the beach of Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean. It was confirmed as belonging to MH370. It was the first physical confirmation that the plane had crashed somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Over the following months and years, more debris washed up on beaches across the Indian Ocean coastline: Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, Rodriguez Island, Mauritius. 27 pieces of debris in total have been identified as definitely or possibly belonging to MH370. All of them washed ashore. All of them already having traveled thousands of kilometers on Indian Ocean currents. None of them telling investigators precisely where the aircraft entered the water. A second major search by an American company called Ocean Infinity in 2018 covered a further 112,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. It also found nothing. On December the 30th, 2025, a new search began. Ocean Infinity returned to the southern Indian Ocean with new technology, new analysis of the Inmarsat data, and a new search area. As you listen to this tonight, that search is still underway. The plane has not been found. Somewhere in the dark water of the southern Indian Ocean, 239 people, and the answers to every question about this mystery are resting on the ocean floor. And we cannot reach them. In 12 years, researchers, investigators, pilots, engineers, and ordinary people fascinated by this mystery have proposed dozens of theories about what happened aboard MH370. I want to walk you through the most serious ones tonight as your breathing slows, because each theory contains something true, even if none of them has ever been proven. The first theory is pilot action. Investigators examined Captain Zahari's background, training, finances, and mental health with extreme thoroughness. They found that 6 weeks before the flight, he had used his home flight simulator to model a route that bore some resemblance to the path MH370 is believed to have taken. This detail has been discussed and debated ever since it was revealed. Some investigators believe it is the most significant piece of evidence pointing to deliberate pilot action. Others note that the simulated route was not a precise match for MH370's actual path, and that experienced pilots routinely practice unusual scenarios on home simulators for legitimate reasons. The Malaysian investigation found no evidence of personal, financial, or psychological problems that would support a motive. No note, no message, no evidence of any kind of plan. The second theory is hijacking. 2 passengers aboard MH370 were traveling on stolen passports, an 18-year-old Iranian and a 29-year-old Iranian who had purchased tickets under the same booking and were traveling to Europe via Beijing. Initial suspicion fell on them immediately. Investigators determined that both men were economic migrants trying to reach Europe for asylum, not terrorists. Interpol found no security alerts for either individual. No credible hijacking group has ever claimed responsibility for MH370. No political demand was ever made. No ransom was ever sought. The third theory is catastrophic technical failure. Some researchers have proposed that a fire or electrical fault could have incapacitated the crew and caused the aircraft to continue flying on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. Similar events have occurred on smaller aircraft. But this theory struggles to explain the deliberate turns. A plane that turned itself around and flew for 7 hours on a specific track was following programmed inputs, not simply drifting. Every theory about MH370 eventually runs into the same wall. The evidence that would answer the question is at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. And until someone finds it, every theory remains a theory. I want to tell you about the people who were left behind. When MH370 disappeared, it did not just take 239 people. It took them completely. Without wreckage, without bodies, without any of the physical evidence that normally gives the families of disaster victims some foundation to grieve from. The families of the 154 Chinese passengers gathered in a Beijing hotel in the hours after the disappearance was announced. They were given almost no information. The airline's communication was poor. The Malaysian government's initial statements were contradictory and incomplete. Tearful relatives held photographs of their missing loved ones and demanded answers from officials who had no answers to give. That scene has repeated itself in various forms for 12 years. Families who refused to accept that their loved ones were dead without bodies to confirm it. Families who spent years chasing every new theory, attending every press conference, corresponding with every researcher who claimed to have new information. Families who are still waiting tonight as you listen to this, still without answers, still without their people, still with nothing to hold on to but the hope that the new search that began in December 2025 will finally find something. One of the families is Grace Subatharai Nathan. Her mother, Ann Daisy, was aboard MH370. Grace has spent 12 years fighting for the investigation to continue, speaking publicly about what the families need, and refusing to let MH370 become just a mystery story that the world has moved on from. She said once, "We are not looking for closure. We are looking for answers." Closure is something that comes after answers. We have not had the answers yet. We are looking for answers, not closure. Answers. 12 years later, Grace, Nathan, and the other families are still waiting for exactly that. The ocean is still keeping what it keeps. The answers are still somewhere in the dark. Your body is very still now. You're breathing very slow and deep. Of all the things that are missing from MH370, the one that stays with me most is the cockpit voice recorder. This device records every sound in the cockpit for the last 2 hours of a flight. Voices, alarms, switches being thrown, the ambient sound of the engines. Any conversation between the pilots and any external communication. In those 2 hours of audio, every question about MH370 would be answered. We would know if there was a struggle. We would know if the captain spoke. We would know if there was an alarm that preceded the transponder being turned off. We would know what happened in the cockpit in the minutes after Goodnight Malaysian 370. All of it is there, recorded, preserved on a device designed to withstand a crash, designed to survive ocean pressure, designed to be found by investigators when they need it most. And we cannot get to it. It is sitting somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean in 4,000 to 6,000 meters of water. In the dark. In the cold. Containing 2 hours of audio that would answer every question this mystery has ever raised. The answers exist. They are recorded. They are in a physical object that is somewhere in a specific location on this planet. And we cannot find it. That gap between the existence of an answer and our inability to reach it is what makes MH370 unlike any other aviation mystery. It is not that the truth is lost. It is that the truth is there, waiting, in the dark, at the bottom of the deepest, most remote stretch of ocean on Earth, while the families wait above on the surface. And the search continues. On December 30th, 2025, a ship called the John K. Explorer left port bound for the southern Indian Ocean. A new search for MH370 had begun. Ocean Infinity, the same American company that led the 2018 search, returned with new technology and new analysis. In the years since their previous search, researchers had refined their understanding of the Inmarsat satellite handshake data. New drift modeling of the debris that washed ashore had provided additional clues about where the aircraft likely entered the water. New search areas had been identified that had not been covered in previous operations. The families of MH370's passengers have been waiting for this moment for years. Some of them were cautiously hopeful. Some were exhausted by hope that had been raised and dashed before. All of them understood that this new search might be the last realistic chance of ever finding the aircraft. As you listen to this tonight, wherever you are resting, whatever time it is in your corner of the world, that ship is out there in the southern Indian Ocean, moving slowly across the water, sending underwater vehicles down into the darkness, scanning the ocean floor with sonar, looking for a shape in the sediment that should not be there. The shape of a Boeing 777. The shape of the answers that 239 families have been waiting 12 years to receive. Maybe it will be found. Maybe this search will locate the wreckage and the black boxes and the truth about what happened aboard MH370 in the early hours of March 8, 2014. And maybe it will not. Maybe the ocean will keep its secret for another year, another decade, another generation. We do not know yet. The search is still happening. The ocean is still not telling. I want to tell you what I think about when I think about MH370. Not the theories. Not the satellite data or the drift modeling or the search coordinates. I think about the moment the passengers fell asleep. Because it was a night flight. 12:41 in the morning, departing. A 5.5-hour journey to Beijing. Most of the 239 people aboard would have closed their eyes not long after takeoff. Pulled the thin airline blanket around their shoulders. Adjusted the small pillow against the headrest. Let the hum of the engines carry them toward sleep. They were doing what you are doing right now. Exactly what you were doing. Lying in the dark. Breathing slowly. Letting the sounds around them fade. Trusting that the night would carry them safely to morning. Most of them probably never knew anything had changed. Most of them were probably asleep when the transponder went off. Asleep when the plane turned west. Asleep as it flew north up the Strait of Malacca and then turned south toward the Indian Ocean. They were just people sleeping on a plane, Not heroes. Not adventurers. Not people expecting anything other than to wake up somewhere over China as the sun came up and have their breakfast and land in Beijing. They were just sleeping. The way you are sleeping now, or nearly sleeping. In the borderland between waking and dreaming, where the sounds of the day begin to lose their edges and the body grows warm and heavy and still. That is where they were. And maybe that is the most human thing about this mystery. Not the satellite data. Not the turned transponder. Not the deliberate turns over the Andaman Sea. But 239 people doing the most ordinary thing in the world. Sleeping. On a night flight. Trusting the dark to hold them